Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'll call the meeting to order. To start, do we have any public comment? No? All right, we can move right into the presentation if you gentlemen are ready.
Hi, my name is
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Greg Gilligan, Superintendent of Schools, and
I'm Jim Mealy, Assistant Superintendent.
for the viewing audience at home, that might
Thank you
not-
so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
We're thrilled, and I think this is, for me, it's the second year we've got to come, and we're excited. So, Dr. Mealy, if you want to hit the slideshow, we'll give you a little bit of an overview. We're going to cover tonight how we came about the strategic plan, the budget directives from the school committee, talk a little bit about my entry plan for the district, the overall financial picture, our proposed needs with justifications, some of the work we're doing around special education and other changes, and then looking ahead. So I think it's important to note that in my first year as superintendent, I had a real honor and privilege to look at the district in a very different way than I had previously as assistant superintendent. I got to conduct an entry plan where I met with almost 1,200 people, maybe 1,136 to be exact, and about half was in person and the other half online. And people are really experts from their own perspectives because they live their own experiences, and what you think you may know, you may not always know. So it was really a different lens becoming the superintendent versus assistant superintendent, and it was eye-opening to me. So as a result of meeting with those folks, we developed a strategic plan continuing from where we were and updated to set 3 objectives and 11 initiatives. And our plan is simply around equity for all students, consistent and rigorous curriculum, and targeted professional practice. We also took into consideration the school committee budget directives, and I think that most folks are pretty familiar with those. Go ahead, James. And then the overall financial picture. Dr. Mealy?
So what you're seeing tonight, as far as the presentation goes, is the presentation we made to the school committee, and then we had received some questions from the chair of the finance committee, Sasha. So we've added those questions and our answers at the end of our regular presentation. And then we can obviously take any additional questions that come up. But the nice part of it is when we presented this presentation, we got questions that kind of inform our presentation tonight, so we can kind of add to some of the slides based on some of the questions we've received from the public as well. This one happens to be just the financial picture. Our FY20 budget is $50,700,170, which does include the $120,000 for the special education program at the Thompson Elementary School. So cost of level services, as I said before to this group and anyone else who will listen, is scarily consistent at 3%, 2.99, 3.01. This year it's 3.01. And so the proposed needs that Dr. Gilligan will talk about total $768,000, which is another 1.5%. So the total proposed FY21 budget is just under $53 million and is 4.52% increase.
And before I talk about last year's final slide in the budget, completing that entry plan really did a couple things for me. It really solidified what an amazing community this is, and we have a lot to be proud of. We've achieved some tremendous results over the years, particularly around MCAS, sending 90% of our kids to college, award-winning robotics, athletics, music, drama, recognized for all sorts of things. But it also highlighted we have challenges too, and I think it's important to recognize those challenges. And we have challenges around whether it be special education, whether it be English learners, students who are economically disadvantaged, or students that excel academically and need to be, we have to find ways to continue to challenge, which is very important. And one of the unique things about laying this out is we've laid out not only a strategic plan that's multi-year, we've laid out a staffing plan. And why do I think that's really critical in this is that as part of Facilities Master Plan 2, we're very fortunate working with the town manager to put the middle school in Facilities Master Plan 2, along with the Atkinson, Franklin, and Kittredge. And I think that 5-year plan is critical so that the needs we have operationally drive the kind of spaces we create for the future. So simply put, we create the best places for teachers to teach and kids to learn. And we're pretty excited about that. So in a nutshell, we really think that the strategic plan, the multi-year staffing plan to meet those needs I had just mentioned is around reducing class size, expanding offerings, and providing support for students and staff in different ways, and we're going to get into that with the different positions. But if you just go back to the last slide, Jim. So last year's slide in the budget, we talked about the strategic plan being a transition. We talked about some of the positive initiatives in the district, the entry plan feedback, and the really need for the district to create a multi-year plan. So a year later, here we are, and we're pretty excited.
So this one just illustrates why we feel we need this 5-year plan to kind of play catch-up, so to speak. If you look back in 2010, North Andover traditionally has spent lower than the state average in per pupil spending. And I've said it many times, this is a pure apples-to-apples comparison. When we do our end-of-year report, it takes into account everything that goes into educational spending in any community, including grants, revolving accounts, the operating budget, indirect costs such as health, group insurance, everything that goes in is factored. And so back in 2010, we were $2,171 below the state average, which equates to about $10.4 million a year. Since then, in 2018, that gap has almost doubled. We're now $3,800 behind, which is about $18.4 million in annual spending. And we are in no way promoting or advocating for trying to meet the state average. We feel we could easily meet our students' needs and still not come close to the state average, but we're just trying to illustrate that we are extremely lean and it's starting to impact how we provide services to our students, and that's what we're trying to address with this 5-year plan. And this is just the graph demonstrating what's happened over that course of time.
Yeah, and I think what's critical is that this budget represents our best thinking at this time about how to address those needs. Also keeping in mind that we want to be sustainable and responsible, and it's been terrific to work with the town manager and our staff, and Lynn has been outstanding. But do so in a way, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to be able to make it all up overnight. But the ability to have this budget supported is tremendous because we have to keep in mind that we have a district that's pre-K through 22. And what are those needs pre-K through 22? And how do we develop a plan to address those needs, representing our best thinking as a leadership team based on all the results and all the work we've had feedback from staff, parents over that time to do so in a way that's, like I said, sustainable and responsible. So meeting the needs of the budget. Jim, you want to talk a little bit about, well, you just talked about the gap. We do well relative to what we have. As I mentioned, we've really excelled in a tremendous amount of areas, but I also think it's important to highlight areas, as I mentioned earlier, that need attention. And, class size being one of them, but also expanding those offerings. We'll talk a little bit later. One of the first steps we took last year in the budget was we noticed that we had some students qualify for a particular section of AP the year before, and it was capped out, because it was a science AP. There were guidelines around safety recommendations, and simply put, I don't think anyone that gets into an AP class and does the work should have to substitute that with something else. So the ability to add that teacher in the first budget was a great first step to add a math and science person to be able to tackle some of those needs, and we'll talk about that. The achievements, as I said, Teachers go the extra mile in this district, and they always have, and they've produced some tremendous results. Same with administrators, but more importantly, the PTOs. Let's think about it. The PTOs have literally created through the model classroom, put a projector and a document camera in every classroom. The consolidated budget, working with the town and technology, has allowed us, along with other donations and Chromebooks, keeping an eye on equity, to be in 1 through 8 at 1.3 kids to device, which is remarkable, because it wasn't long ago that we couldn't cobble together in a school 25 working computers, and Chromebooks really changed that, and Mr. Grant's done a really nice job with a plan for the future. The other thing is the amazing partnerships. So when I talk about partnerships, not only with the town manager and working with her staff, but Rick Gorman and Youth Services, North Andover Police and Fire, the Health Department, working with other agencies like DCF, creating more foster homes in North Andover for kids, so that if for some reason, they can't stay at home because of a situation. We didn't have any foster homes in North Andover. Now we've got a few more. We had 1 or 2 total for the whole town. So there's been some amazing partnerships. People have done a tremendous jobs with us, and we're excited. So those operational and capital needs, simply put, in order to tackle class size, I think it's no secret that the middle school has the highest class size, in the region, and that when you look at capital needs and you look at year 5 of our proposed needs, that staffing is out for the middle school. Now, whether we can meet that capital needs by then, I'm not sure. We've applied to the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, 3 times for an expansion on the middle school, and we'll continue to do so. But I'm really excited to work with Dr. Mealy, Melissa Murphy-Rodriguez, the town, and everyone on that facilities master plan too, to best identify all sorts of options that may be able to meet those needs. So these operational needs will drive those capital needs, and to be able to reduce class size, which we've been able to do, and we'll show you a little bit. We've made some good progress, even with the challenges of opening up the Brad Street in that area with a building that probably wasn't standing in maybe June. It got shipped up, I think, and then put together. Has really allowed us to reduce some class size, and we still have challenges at the elementary. We want to tackle that at the middle school, and we'll talk a little bit more about the high school and some of their needs. Expanding course offerings, and that's for all students. It's not only in terms of special education, in terms of growing capacity in special education, or EL. It's students who excel academically. How do we continue to find ways to challenge them and push them? And then supports for all students. One of the symptoms or issues of having challenging budgets over time is that you always try to keep teachers, and that's what we've done. We've had some challenging times over the last decade, and the ability to do that, keep teachers is always at the forefront, because they're on the front lines and they're doing the work day in and day out. At the same time, until we worked with the town to come up with a collaborative way on the Medicaid reimbursement for curriculum. It had been almost a decade since we had purchased new curriculum materials. So things like that are really important. But the other supports for students and staff are, in terms of some of those related services, when you have a school with 400 plus kids and there's only 1 administrator, the ability to supervise and coach and get back to parents and engage the community and deal with student management and deal with the curriculum as an instructional leader is a real challenge, and those are some of the areas we hope to address over the next few years. So the proposed needs, as we look forward to next year, you can see it laid out. And I've been known, Jim, to talk about, go through all the information before we get to the slides, so I'm going to let you click. Am I doing more clicking? Yes. All right, so one of the things we did this past year based on the entry plan is looking at, doing something in a multi-step way. And at the elementary school, I think it's been about 5 or 6 years now since we've had a half-time assistant principal at the Franklin and half at the Sargent. And the Atkinson school over the years has been very close to the population numbers of the Franklin school. And it's certainly something that is needed because, you know, it just deals with a variety of issues. So it deals with everything from engagement with home to student management to needs of a student to connecting with outside agencies to just a whole host of what they do every single day. You name it. An assistant principal, you know, is a former high school assistant principal a long time ago. There are pieces around evaluation, also around curriculum, also around student management, also engaging with parents, and also, you know, evaluating teachers. But more importantly, there's, as assigned by the principal, just about everything else. And we really believe that Atkinson would benefit tremendously with that position.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you're saying here a full-time assistant principal for student populations of 350 and more, and you're saying full-time for Atkinson, but keep Franklin and Sargent at half-time?
No, it's a proposed halftime.
Okay.
It's just indicating that that's the standard. We're
Got
not
it.
going to do the full-time though, we're looking for a half-time like the other schools.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things I think that's really critical for North Andover is when you look at us pre-K through 22. So if someone comes to, you know, we're looking at creating this position of a parent registrar liaison. When someone currently comes to register in North Andover, you have someone at the Bradstreet, you have someone at an elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, which happens. You have to go to every single different school and navigate, you know, how to do that. One of the key components about a registrar, and it would be registrar parent liaison, not parent registrar, I guess, is that it's really critical to us, particularly from a state reporting standpoint, in terms of having all the appropriate information in of how different groups identify, whether they may qualify for free or reduced lunch or being economically disadvantaged. And sometimes they don't realize that, and to be able to do that in one-stop shopping is critical. The other piece is we're super interested in hiring the best candidate, but if we could find someone that's bilingual, I think it's no surprise, or it may be a surprise to some, you know, that there's around 40 different languages spoken within our school district. You know, we have an English learner population, primarily at Thompson and Atkinson, about the same caseload, and most of those kids do really well and test out. And then we have students at the other elementary schools, and then the middle school and high school have much lower numbers, but they're typically move-ins to the district, new to North Andover. And the ability, not just for EL students, but for all families where English is not their first language, to have someone who's bilingual, and to have someone that can do that reaching out is really important to that homeschool connection and doing well. So you have to go where folks are. You know, we have a program right now at Woodridge where we have some Chromebooks, and we've partnered with Woodridge, and we've done some really awesome outreach, but we've also done some really good stuff with Rick Gorman in the summer around special education. We need someone that's going to be able to connect with parents for students who may be struggling, who may not have that connection. Some of it is based around language, and others is the need is just across the district. So the ability to have that person going to houses, visiting, knocking on doors, trying to coordinate through the different schools, I think is make a huge difference for us. Grade 6 teacher, I know we've been talking about the middle school having no room, and that's why we keep applying. But talking to Principal Gonsalves, you know, we've talked to him about there is a 6th grade team that only has, it's a 3-person team as compared to the 4-person teams in 6th grade. And without, but still meeting the needs and not displacing folks tremendously, they're going to figure a way that we can add this person, and it makes a big difference for that actual class with the incoming group. Next year, that we could probably we can decrease class size right around 1.5 students in 6th grade, and you know, if you recall, or if you've seen any of the data, we're around 24 and a half students, and you know, I know I've got a 6th grader, and you know, I think you know, the challenges at the middle school, it's going to be a few years out as we figure out that capital space, but the things that we can do in the interim, I think, are critical.
Is it true that the incoming 6th grade class is a bubble here? Because I know it is, at least at the Sargent. My son is in the 5th grade at the Sargent, and there's 27 children in his classroom.
Yeah, so we have 2 big 5th grades in the district, and the Sargent is 1, and we're going to talk a little bit more about elementary class size. I think it's about, I want to say it's about 2 students less than the current 6th grade.
It's about the same.
About the same. It's Yeah, the pressure points are in elementary schools, as we'll talk about in the future. A couple slides up is, oftentimes we've run out of space. We've backfilled some to decrease class size. We won't get to that slide. But at the same time, when you make a decision with schools that are small, or even the biggest we have, I think, is 4 classrooms at a grade level. 2 makes it a really big class, but 3 makes it a much smaller class. And the pressure points we see is we're pretty steady in enrollment, but the challenge is there's a lot of births sometimes in one year, or there's a lot of, for example, this year in 5th grade, 28 students were new to North Andover in 5th grade that didn't, had no association with North Andover before. So you have those pressure points and then the distribution of those students. So. Elementary teachers. So we want to continue to try impact class size. And, we do have space constraints, but we are committed to lowering that. We'll show you some where we are and how we've done over time, because it's significant. If you said to me 5 years ago would be where we are today, it would be hard to believe that we've been able to get there. So the Bradstreet's given us the ability to, A, backfill some positions to lower class size, and B, create more appropriate spaces like a library or a special education room, or we no longer have services in cubbies in a hall because we were really packed, and that's been a significant positive development for us. Jim, do you want to talk about the middle school multiple supports?
Sure. So one of the things that we've tried over the years is to ensure that we have programs that students can transition from elementary level to the middle school and then to the high school. We've often lost students to out-of-district placement because we didn't have the programs at the next level. That's what this is trying to do, is add the multiple supports program at the middle school level, which we have currently at the elementary and would continue to maintain at the elementary level. And it would allow us to keep those students in district, which is best for the students.
So it's a continuum of support. I think sometimes when people talk about building capacity within special education, I hear some districts talk about cost avoidance. Certainly there's a benefit when you can build capacity and students can stay in. So if you're, for example, if you're adding, programming that's $100,000 and you have a couple placements that may be, $250,000 to $275,000, that's a benefit. But what's more important to me is that we have kids that are able to stay with their peers in this community that aren't getting on buses for long periods of time, and that we can provide a continuum support from elementary school through middle and up through high school, and we're building that. I think one of the important things to note is, and this may be getting a little ahead of myself, James, is that we have a new director of special education. We've done some reorg in my first year. We eliminated the position of assistant superintendent for student services and went with the director of special education. We hired a new assistant superintendent for curriculum that took my job. But more importantly, that created a position in one of our coordinators of curriculum. And that person had a background in EL. So we're looking for the best and brightest to fill these spots so that we can best serve kids in a way that might not be as traditional as laid out in the past. But more importantly, why I mentioned the executive director of special education is new, is that she's conducting, Marcy Bacuzzi, a review of all the programming in the district. And we're taking into account what we learned in the entry plan and what we know from being in schools all the time and what we know from our staff, et cetera. But B, she may have recommendations too for the future that we're trying to address in the 5-year plan. But there's gonna be a lot of other ways that we can do it in cost-neutral ways, or reorgs, or better meeting the needs of cohorts as they change over time. The Bradstreet School, when the Bradstreet opened, I think one of the challenges at Bradstreet was that, we opened up a new school without increasing the operating budget. So we opened up a whole new school, that particular year. All of the increases in that proposed budget went to the Bradstreet School. But at the same time, it was terrific for the elementary schools moving out the K, because it reduced some of the caseloads there. But more importantly, when you talk about special education in the programming in pre-K, now that has to go pre-K through K. and expanded to offer than just more than the pre-K students that exist, because now those students go to K, where they had typically gone to an elementary school where there was programming, and we need another person to best support that, and it's a real need that's been identified. High school special education teacher, just in order to continue with the needs of state and federal mandates and what's best for kids, they are in need of a special education teacher for inclusion at the high school.
Does one already exist?
At the high school? Yeah, so the high school, I believe, has 6.25 or 6.5 inclusion special education teachers. So what that would mean is, you know, Jim, Dr. Mealy, as a district, I think we're probably right around 14% special ed if the high school's, you know, say roughly 1,400 kids. You know, it's a certain amount per caseload. And it's not always just about the caseload, it's about what the disability is, because the severity of, well, not the severity, the needs can vary greatly within different diagnoses or different disabilities, and what support is needed, and that's why the high school needs that. Dr. Mealy, would you like to talk about out-of-district tuition, as you're very well versed?
So just as a clarification, when Dr. Gilligan says 14%, he's talking about the students who have been identified. The special education budget is about 30% of our budget. Out-of-district tuition, we are asking to increase that line item. You know as well as anyone that every year we have had to, almost every year, have had to rely on the stabilization fund. We are trying to better address that and better budget for the expenses. Right now, we budget 100% of our circuit breaker reimbursement. Circuit breaker reimbursement comes in the following year for expenses from the previous year, for eligible expenses. And just a quick refresher, 4 times of the state average per pupil spending, so it's a little over $40,000. Once a district pays that amount for any one student, anything over that amount is eligible for circuit breaker reimbursement the following year. So an out-of-district placement averages about $66,000, not counting transportation. So you're looking at about $21,000 for an out-of-district placement on average that's eligible for reimbursement the next year. And they're supposed to reimburse at 75%. It doesn't often happen. It has this year for the first time since I can remember. But usually it's between 65 and 70% reimbursement. They have proposed, and it looks like it might happen, that transportation will finally be included as part of circuit breaker reimbursement. The only caution that I have on that one is there's only so much money, so I'm wondering, as they add in, they want to phase in transportation, 25% next year, 50%, 75%, and then 100%. But does that mean the percentage of reimbursement is going to go down because they only have so much money for reimbursement? We'll see. So what this will do is relieve pressure on the school operating budget to allow us the ability to make adjustments during the year to meet unexpected needs, because we don't have that flexibility right now. We make hard choices each year on things that we probably should do. It would be better if we were doing them, but we can't, just because we have to guard against unforeseen or unanticipated expenses. And it also guards against reductions in circuit breaker funding, because that happens too. As I said, you know, this was the first year we've seen 75% in a long time. And going into the budget, you do not know what that percentage reimbursement is going to be. So you might think you're going to get what you got this year, and you might end up getting $200,000 less, which on a $50 million budget doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have no discretionary money available, it is a lot. Yep.
It's for a special education contingency fund, so that's separate from the special education stabilization fund.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so we would hope that we'd be able to handle unanticipated expenses through this,
So year after
rather
year,
than
another fund, and then
No, it would just be, for instance, if on average our out-of-district tuitions cost us $5 to $5.5 million a year, and we budget $4 million, thinking we're getting $1.5 million in circuit breaker, we're right at
you're right,
that amount.
yeah.
If we got an additional 130, that means that we wouldn't have to tap into the stabilization fund if we
Okay.
get additional students, or if we don't get them, then we could use that to prepay and now start to maybe build a contingency.
But, I mean, but you would see this as a line item going forward, is what I'm saying? Or do you think this is just like a one-year thing?
So if you look at the 5-year plan, we have it in for this year. We need some breathing
I
room.
mean, I'm looking at it right here, that's why I'm curious as to about how
Yeah.
you were, I understand the purpose of it, I really do, I'm just curious as to how you're gonna function within it.
We need some breathing room. I mean,
Yeah.
we're right at that edge, and we're really appreciative of the really creative work of the town with the Special Education Stabilization Fund. You know, for this year, in addition, you know, if we can meet these needs or not budget everything up front as
Yeah.
they come ahead, you know, it just may give us the opportunity to prepay, which I think it's been a long time since one have been able to prepay, James.
So
So
would
it's-
this be easier for you to use than the Special Education Stabilization Fund, or are we hitting the maximum right now for what you're allowed to take out of the special?
We are allowed
Stabilization
150
fund, right?
this year,
Okay.
because we used 250 last year, and it's 400,000 for a 2-year period.
The
Yep.
numbers are staggering.
So, and it's a good example that the out-of-district tuition is a good example of when people ask us, well, can you draw the line for us? And we always hesitate to do so because the first thing to go, I put this in, not surprisingly, every year. We need more money
Yeah.
to cover out-of-district expenses, and it's always the first thing to go.
Yeah.
So we're glad that right now,
Right now.
It's
Yeah.
still in there.
No, I appreciate the explanation, I do. It's a complicated issue and it's a tough one.
It is, and unanticipated when you're booked to the line, the folks
Yeah.
move in, and they have the right to the, a free and appropriate public
Oh,
education.
you don't have any choice. I get it.
The costs,
don't.
as Jim said, they can range, I think earlier, from anywhere from 66,000 to some placements could be as high as $300,000 with transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Couple slides back, you had referred, you said you noticed in recent years a trend towards special education expenses or something. And I've seen that I've seen increase in students with more significant disabilities and or behavioral challenges. And this seems multiple years we've seen that same comment. Is this secular or cyclical, and how do we know?
I think it's not unique to North Andover. I think that across Massachusetts, New England, and the nation, we've seen a rise in diagnoses of anxiety, mental health issues, social emotional learning. And, I do think it's one of the things that the district we've been working to build capacity, but at the same time, the cohorts change and the needs change as people move in and move out and what you have to meet by law. So I don't know, I do know that the rise has been steady in these challenges, and I do know that we continue to try to find the best ways to meet those challenges. But the rise in anxiety, and we're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide, and then some of the other assumptions as we move forward, is something not just as we try to position one position to tackle it. It's really got to be a philosophy of the district in terms of tier 1 and 2 interventions for social emotional learning in the classroom with professional development. How do we tackle it through partnerships with, for example, we have some partnerships that we'd like to expand with, like Leahy Behavioral Health, and how do we do wraparound services. It's a complex issue, but it's certainly one that's grown in just about every district.
but specifically, it does not seem cyclical. It seems to be a steady increase.
We're lucky. I don't know if anyone's ever had the chance to see the director of nursing in the district. She was named the Nurse Administrative Director of the Year last year for the entire state of Massachusetts, and I think she is really has a really progressive approach to overall student well-being. But one of the positions that we think is very important is at the Atkinson. We'd like to have a half-time nurse. We said they're the third highest in the initial presentation for visits to the school nurse. They're actually the fourth, but I think that's because one of the things I had mentioned in the previous presentation is that Sargent has the multiple supports program, which actually requires significant medical attention on a basis pretty regular, and that's what puts it there. But all of our nursing, if you look at any of the presentations that Director Barzak has done in the last few years, it's really stunning the amount of visits that the school nurse has, and they're for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's the prescribed medication on a schedule, sometimes it's as needed. It's for medical conditions, and whether that's diabetes, whether that's one of the ones that we've seen, I think in 2018 she made a presentation, the rise in visits for anxiety. What's critical about this is nurses are on the front line of mental health. Oftentimes, issues around social emotional learning or anxiety and those types of things manifest themselves, particularly with young kids. They don't know why they feel a particular way. But this is really critical because these are the folks that not only do the proactive stuff like the screenings, et cetera. They're in touch with the parents. They're running the healthcare plans, and they have a really high return to class rate. I think it's about 95% in the district. Return to class rate, meaning we get those kids back to class in a way that they're not missing out now in math or English. And we think that this would go a long way. We've been supporting with a small grant, a couple extra hours and days at the Atkinson over time, and that's no longer there. And we think that this would be the best addition for us. EL, so we, in my opinion, I'm going to frankly say we have an outdated model. There's only one EL teacher in the entire district that serves as a teacher within the program to service our kids. And we use a model of tutors that have to be certified EL teachers that have been paid at a tutor rate. They're not part of any bargaining unit or anything. And over time, the challenge has become we've had some really dedicated and talented tutors. But as we've tried to fill these positions, someone will come. And I think if you followed the budget the last couple of years, I think the rate was around $29 an hour. And it was part-time, filling all these different needs at the schools. As soon as these folks got another offer from another community, they were out of here. So the consistency for the kids, what's best practice is to really go with a teacher model. We have one that the person's retiring, and we're going to fill that one. And she's also kind of been the coordinator. So the filling of the one will provide increased services to particularly the Atkinson. Thompson might have one more student, and I'm sure that the proposed EL teacher will have to figure out what are the needs. We look at that every year, and then we figure out with the tutors remaining, the EL teacher that retired and replaced would be up one, and then each additional year you'll see in years 2 and 3 of the 5-year plan adding 2 more. And we think it's a critical need, and it's really important. We've done well with what we had, but it's become really hard to keep that consistency for kids as we've had such turnover. All right, so special education, we're going to continue to pursue opportunities to reduce out-of-district costs. As some of you may know, we belong to the CREST Collaborative, which is locally headquartered here in Methuen. In the past year, there's no reason you can't join another collaborative. We joined SEAM Collaborative out of Stoneham, and it seems to be a really good fit. So you get a discounted rate to be a member versus a non-member. So these are our local collaboratives, and we'll continue to pursue all sorts of ways to reduce these out-of-district costs while still providing what kids are entitled to, and they deserve and they need. As I said, Marcy Bacuzzi, our Executive Director of Special Education, is conducting an assessment right now of the entire district. She understands that this year, there are, as you'll see in the budget, to meet the needs and the mandates and the laws and what kids need, there's special education positions here. As we move forward, there'll be special educators within that plan moving forward, but at the same time, we'll have to look at how we do business and the possibility of reorganizing cost-neutral measures to meet those needs. Jim talked a lot about the circuit breaker reimbursement to 65%.
We assume 65%. As I said, the average has been 65 to 70. I haven't seen it below 65, so it's always safe, and we hope for more.
Jim, do you want to talk about the teaching and teaching assistant staffing needs?
So one of the things, and this comes up later regarding OPEB, and I see some other people in the room who were part of that OPEB committee, close to a quorum, I think. So we're really sensitive to the impact that additional positions, benefit-eligible positions, have on that liability. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is we have over 150 teaching assistants in the district. And the model that we want to look at is as teaching assistants leave, replace them with teachers, meaning that as 3 teaching assistants leave, replace them with 1 teacher. It's a model that other districts have begun to try. Teachers are very effective in delivering the services, more so than a TA often is, because they have a higher skill level and more ability to do so. So we're looking at that model in order to try to offset as much as we can additional benefit eligible positions and try as much as possible to actually have it be a wash.
And I would just say our teaching assistants that work for us now, I mean, they are the best of the best. I mean, they talk about going above and beyond and all the different things they do to support kids. I mean, it's amazing what they do. But as we look at, through attrition, how do we do that? There may be some other ways to do it, and I think that's going to be part of Marcy's recommendations as she assesses everything about how to best support students.
Will that impact the larger classrooms that need to have additional support within the classroom, or is that position an aide as opposed to a TA?
So a teaching assistant, teaching assistants, and as I said, they're remarkable. The majority of all the teaching assistants in the district, they're all tied to IEPs and meeting those needs. And I think what Jim's saying is, typically 3 teaching assistants, as we've had an increase of teaching assistants over the years. We do have a certain amount that come and go. Some often become teachers or retire. Those are tied to those minutes. The Bradstreet has some classroom aides, as you can imagine. It's been a long time model in North Andover where there's been a kindergarten aide in the kindergarten, because you have one adult and who's the teacher, and then you have the aide, and you have all these 5-year-old kids, some 6. But those are tied to the minutes, and we have to continue to find ways to meet those needs. And we're looking at all sorts of ways that, whether it's a
For those classrooms that are a little larger than you hope them to be, like you see the 27 children in a classroom, in a classroom that might be blended, you might have needs, some children who are more needy than others. If we don't physically have the space to put another teacher, another classroom, perhaps more bodies within that individual room would be more successful.
Yeah.
I mean, do I know how you get there? No, it's just.
Well, oftentimes what you'll see is, you might have some classrooms in the district.
And I'm confusing aides with TAs. Was my problem.
Well, the teaching assistants, I think more, they were used to be called paraprofessionals, or paras might be something that you're more familiar with.
True.
We made the change a few years back here in North Andover because we recognized the importance of the work they do, that they are teachers who assist these kids every day.
Yeah.
But more importantly, to your point, when you have a class of 26 versus a class of maybe 17, which you'll see in some of the other grades, proportionally, there's going to be more needs with students on IEPs,
Right.
And to meet those needs. So oftentimes, those larger classrooms do have.
It's not just to meet the needs of any special ed child or child who needs more, but also everybody else in the classroom.
Yeah, we've had, you'll see when we get to the class size, it's amazing to think of how far we've come and where we hope to go.
Yeah.
Class size still continues to be a challenge, particularly at the middle school, it's high at the high school. But,
Yeah.
there's some pockets in elementary, and we're going to, in the budget, that's what we're trying to tackle for next year with those 3 additional teachers.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the creating the contingency against these unanticipated costs. With the Special Education Stabilization Fund, we're very grateful that the town has found a creative way to help us with that, as well as budgeting for it next year to try to gain that breathing room, because we've been up to the line. We've continued to work with the town manager to identify cost savings or revenue increases to help fund the recommended budget increases. Dr. Mealy is part of the quorum of the OPEB that you said exists. If you'd like to talk a little more about the OPEB liability, I think you touched on it a little bit in terms of, what's our overall, how many staff we have, and then what does that look like going forward to best meet the needs of kids. And sometimes I think we'll be able to do that. You'll see with the head count, I think, that we'll be able to do that in different ways. Facilities master plan too. I mean, we're really excited about it in a way that's cost effective. So we keep applying for the middle school addition. We'll continue to do so. For overcrowding, the state only funded 11 projects last year. We'll meet with them again this year. They said we had a really good application, and we've read all the decisions. We keep up on it. At the same time, we'll have to look at all the other different ways. So maybe there's other ways to create that space or classrooms and how we configure things and look at it. And I think all of that will be in play. And, I'm really looking forward to working with the town on that. I think people have realized through Facilities Master Plan 1, like the amazing things that were done in this community. And I think with 2, again, we did some great things for the schools in 1, and now 2, I see the same happening. And continuing to pursue cost-neutral opportunities to adjust to our changing needs.
So this is what the numbers look like. We have, as we usually present, in different categories, district-wide, elementary, high school, middle school, maintenance, special education, technology, and transportation. You can see the actuals going back to FY16 and the percentage increase from the FY20 budget to the FY21 proposed. And that is a total of 3%, and then those improvements fall into these categories. Of the ones we just reviewed, 38,000 are district-wide, 320,000 are at the elementary level, 60,000 at the middle school, and 350,000, including that money for the out-of-district placement, is 350,000, for a total of 4.52%.
One of the things we think is important is we continue to list our needs and what we propose in the budgets to the strategic objectives and the 11 initiatives within our strategic plan. We highlighted that here. One thing I would say is oftentimes they can overlap too. It's not necessarily just hitting one category, but if you click on the strategic plan, it's one page, but then you can click onto the subgroups and look at the timelines, the goals, who's responsible, what we expect the early outcomes to be, anticipated outcomes, early indicators of success, et cetera. And then looking forward as a district is a 5-year plan. I mean, it really comes down to class size reduction and how we're going to do it. I mean, these positions are, for the most part, we're talking about teachers on the front lines. We're talking about some additional support, whether it be social workers, or / adjustment counselors for the future, the nursing, the EL, special education, increasing library media specialists and what they do, reading. We're going to talk a little bit about reading, where we were a couple years ago and the progress we've made. And there's a few administrative positions. I think one of the things that over the years is we've been really lean as an operation administratively. We're probably in about the bottom 20% of administrators, by state standards. So everyone's doing more, and some of those are needed. So you see the Atkinson this year, and then there's a plan for a half-time assistant principal the following year at the Thompson, and the year out at the Kittredge. And we have these different needs, and we'll try to meet those needs. And Dr. Mail, you want to add anything with looking out the 5 years?
So, I don't know if anyone is still here from when I did it. I think it was FY16. In the presentation, I showed where we are benchmarked versus the state average on a lot of categories, including administration, including custodial, administrative assistants, teacher pay, all of those. And not surprisingly, when you see where we are as far as overall per pupil spending, we were in the bottom 20% in all those categories as well. So we're trying to address those needs with this. And as Dr. Gilligan said earlier, his first year last year was coming in, and it was a transition year to get the information together to present the 5-year plan, which is what you're seeing now and what you're going to see in the next slide, is that 5-year plan. And the way that was developed was that the principals all came together, identified the needs in their individual buildings, and as a district determined where do we want to be in 5 years in order to truly provide the supports that our students need. And so I didn't print out, mainly because these are all colored slides and it would have been a lot of ink.
Expensive.
It would have been. But these are all linked on our website on the budget page, and I'll send them to you as well. But included in that, this is the summary page of our 5-year plan. There's also a more detailed one that has the justifications for each request and explains why why the principals identified that as needs for the district. And so year 1 is boxed there, and that is the budget request you're seeing this year, which includes the half-time assistant principal, registrar / parent liaison, which we have right here and didn't have on the slide correctly, the teacher in the 6th grade, and so on. And then in the following years, and the justifications all explain this, you'll see another assistant principal in year 2 and then year 3, so that by year 3, we would have a half-time assistant principal at each of our elementary schools. Did you want to say something else?
I was just going to say, it's also taking all the feedback from the entry plan, taking the development with the leadership team, everyone around the strategic plan, looking at the school committee budget directives, and understanding that we have to do so in a sustainable and responsible way. It's trying to look at that big picture, pre-K through 22, age 22. And we've done some really terrific things, but meeting those needs, I think what all of us have to realize, and I think we're keenly aware of it, is that these are all of our students pre-K through 22. So, we have students right now at 6 different elementary schools, and then they go to 1 middle school and 1 high school, and then a lot of them go on to our programming 18 to 22, where we're partnered with Andover for one, and we've created our own. But it's really about trying to meet those needs in a responsible way over 5 years, with the understanding that this represents our best thinking, keeping the big picture in mind, meeting those needs along the way, and doing so year after year.
On the prior slide, the 5-year plan summary topics, does OPEB fall underneath administrative leadership support, or should that be its own category, or is that intertwined within all of this?
What we've been trying to stress is that we are keenly aware of the impact that additional positions have. So we will always strive to offset additions in any ways we can. But it's not a budgeted item. That hasn't been.
So on the next slide, did you do an analysis of how this would impact OPEB?
We have not done that, no. We don't know how successful we're going to be in reducing eligible positions, so we don't yet know what the net will be.
What I would say is we're keenly aware of it. I know that as Dr. Milley said, that they're working closely on it. We'll continue to work with the town on it. But I also think what's really important is that we're casting a net wide and far for the best candidates possible. So when we post jobs, once a budget goes out, we look to find the best candidates, but we also look to find ways that are creative within that budget. So if you see something that's a .5 position and we have the ability with a retirement or a move or other funding to combine that with another .5 of someone who may already exist and that's on benefits together to meet that need. So when we propose these positions, I think that we'll be looking every way possible to find ways, particularly around some of those halftime positions, to do that.
The other thing about these positions is they're contingent on the capital, the facilities master plan phase 2. As you can see, starting in year 3, where we're at proposing to add 6 classroom teachers at the elementary level, in year 4 again, in year 5, then 15 middle school teachers. That would obviously be contingent upon the space having been made available. So, not surprisingly, those could have to be moved out, awaiting the space of being available. So we'll see how that plays out. The right-hand column, Dr. Gilligan mentioned earlier that we tied this closely to the strategic plan, among other things. But that just indicates the objectives, whether it's targeted professional practice, equity for all students, or consistent, rigorous curriculum. Each of those has initiatives, 3 or 4 initiatives. And so it identifies the objective and the initiative that's addressing.
Can I ask a question? It's sort of backwards looking, but in thinking through the issues you're raising about the facilities master plan too. A few years ago, and I was not on the finance committee then, but I was very interested because I had a child that was impacted. I had 3 children who are now at the Sargent, one who went to the new ABECC when it opened. But there's a lot of discussion about we will build this new kindergarten building, and part of the long-term plan was to add a number of teachers to the elementary school, as I understood it, that there would be additional elementary level teachers added. The idea being this will free up spaces in our elementary schools, there will be new teachers, the class size at the elementary level will come down. Being a parent at the Sargent, I haven't seen that, and I don't know if it shows up in some of the great support people, but how did that play out? Like, were those people that we talked about adding actually added, or like looking at this when you budget for 15 new middle school teachers, I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, is this really real, or is, like, and do these things traditionally play out that way?
So I think 2 components, because we're gonna talk about the additions, but I think one of the things that you notice is my predecessor had budgeted in the budget a couple positions, and we've been able to backfill, 5, 6, 7 of those positions. Classroom teachers, for example, last year we added 3 elementary teachers, and 2 went to classroom, but one of the things is we've been adding these classrooms, but we didn't add specialists. So we're gonna talk about specialists. All the students in different sections get art, music, PE, and so we had cobbled together, losing travel time under the contract, teachers going to teach 1 class at the Brad Street, in art, and all the different specialists. So when we get to the class size, I'll show you where we are. I mean, in terms of K through 2 and 3 through 5, we're down a little bit over 2 students in each from where we were just in 2015. I'll show you the percentage, but certainly, at the Sargent is definitely, it's the highest class average right now at 23.4.
Yeah, I mean, it's wildly different for my children in different grades. Like, my daughter is in the 3rd grade and has a very small class size. One of my sons is in the 5th grade and has an astronomically huge class size and has been very large since he got to the building. But I guess I'm just wondering, like, how, like, in terms of what happened with the ABECC, did that actually happen? Like, the people that we said we were going to hire, did we actually hire, like, of those positions?
Yeah, so, as we've put people in, certainly we haven't backfilled all those spaces, because if you remember, part of it too is we didn't have appropriate spaces. There was, in terms of equity, there was 1 school with no library. The library was in a closet, and now that's a space. There were students in different places. So I can show you over the years the time, and we can talk about last year's additions. Certainly made a difference. But as I mentioned before, it's also tackling those needs. So you have to take into consideration, and they do every May. I got to say, the principals have been tremendous. In a lot of communities, it's every man or woman for themselves as a principal trying to get what's best for their school. And here, I think we've developed a team that really looks at a bigger picture. So depending on the different programming, the needs of that particular class, you may see some smaller. And the reality is, when you add 1 teacher in a school, like take Kittredge, where there's 2 of everything, you add 3, and now the classes go from really big to smaller. And certainly Sargent is on the radar, and it's something we're looking at. But when we get to the class size, we've been able to backfill some of those positions, and that's how we, Jim, if you want to go to the class size now.
Yeah, we have, I recall, and I think Amy may have assisted in the presentation a couple years ago. Yeah, so we actually, you guys were really helpful because we had this question.
Yep.
How quickly will we backfill elementary school teachers?
Yep.
And that was presented, and I think probably what would be helpful, and obviously this was before your time as superintendent, so we can't ask you to maybe opine specifically on that, but we could maybe dig that up and see how we tracked, if we were successful in filling those anticipated teacher slots.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we can get you that information, but certain places gained spaces that were appropriate, and others we were able to decrease class size, because as you can see, so you look at the recommended guidelines and you look at where we were just not that long ago. It's over 50% when you go back just a few short years. So, as someone who was a principal in this district from 2008 into 2012, it was pretty common at that time when I was looking at it, of a lot of our classes were capped at, 28 was the cap. And we would would have to move students if they moved in district within the course of the year somewhere else, and we're at 28. And that's not something we've hit or had to hit, we've hit this year. We're down to 14% being over the recommended guidelines of all the classes that exist. But each and every year, we have to take a look at what's the population, what's coming out of now the Brad Street. Jim is following, and prior to him, Dr. Rogers, the kindergarten coordinator. What are the births? What's the birth rate? We call every preschool within a certain radius to try to figure out who's coming that we don't know about. And believe it or not, a lot of folks have said when we went to free full-day kindergarten that number was going to really jump. And I think, Jim, in the first year, it was about the same, or might even be a couple students less. So we can certainly track that down, but as with the population we've had, I can give you a historical data on class size over time, by school, by grade, and would be happy to provide it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I probably should have submitted some of these questions beforehand, but with your 5-year plan and looking at this and keeping in mind that I think you said the statistic is when you look at our district compared to the statewide average, we're well below in almost every comparison category. Where does your 5-year plan move us in relation to that? Does it move us towards the average? Are you guys pushing us towards there?
It gets us to about 20 per class, district-wide.
For student the student class size, but what about all the other metrics? Does this move us closer to the median in terms of per pupil spending?
Dr. Mealy, if you look at what over the 5 years, and we look at what was the most available data, was the 17, 18 per pupil spending, or was it 16, 17? What would this bring us to, roughly?
Right, so, as I said earlier, it doesn't come close to getting us to the state average. But we don't need to be there. We don't need to be at the state average. We are very confident that if this 5-year plan is implemented, that by the end, we'll have class sizes that are where they should be. We'll have the supports for the students that they need, and we'll be able to provide everything that we need to provide for our students and still be well below the state average.
I have a question related to that. This budget is mostly elementary school centric, and we don't have too many programs for high school. I mean, middle school obviously is neglected. You say that we don't really need to be close to the state average. Why do you say that? Because don't you think that we need to have these high schoolers more programs, more newer programs and technologies, nanotechnologies, and so many different programs? Why don't we try to include that can also help us come closer to the state average? So we should think about coming close to the state average. The other question related to the whole thing is, I was just thinking while you were presenting the budget, is that it is very good to have a good budget focused on elementary schools, because that's the foundation. But it's kind of lopsided. When before you came here to North Andover school system, we had a kindergarten that was first half day. Then we had full day. Then initially, because my kids went, I had to pay for it 1 year. Then it was free. When the town did not have the resources to provide for enough teachers, good student-teacher ratio, we did not have resources to provide for good programs to high schoolers or middle schoolers. What made town decide, or even continue to decide, to provide for full-day kindergarten education and not meeting the quality or standards of state? So what makes you prioritize that way? You know, where you are stretching without really providing all the quality and resources, and the other side of the school system is getting completely neglected.
So I'm going to tackle the first part, and Jim, I'll give you the kindergarten full day because you're an expert on that. You really help bring that in. I would argue or say that if you look in the plan, there's a plan for 7 teachers in year 2, I believe, for the north end of a high school.
For year 2, we have 420,000.
7 teachers. That's 7 teachers for north end of a high school.
Now, what kind of teachers? And then for year 4, you have 120,000 allocated.
Yeah, so we're looking to expand. I think one of the things, it's no secret that we had, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges came and did a complete review of the high school this year. They'll be writing up a comprehensive report that will serve as a blueprint on ways to improve the high school. The high school has really done tremendous in terms, 90% of our kids are going on to college, and we've got programming that's, as I mentioned before, we have a lot to be proud of at north end of a high school, but the 7 teachers in that plan is to add to support the high school, have the space. It may involve a schedule change based on recommendations from the New England Association of Schools and Colleges on what's best for kids. So that's going to go directly to teachers for programming on how to best meet the needs. And we'll be looking forward to that report, which will be coming out later this spring from NEASC. They accredit every high school and college pretty much in all of New England. So I would say that, that is in there for the high school. The other component about elementary school I think that's really important is how someone does in life, and the research is really clear about that, is whether someone can read by 3rd grade on average with grade level. And, there is a tension at the elementary because we've had such big class sizes. You'll see a slide coming up. It was not long ago. There was not one reading teacher in elementary in North Andover. I think it was 2012 or 13. They were all cut from the budget. And we've been able to build back, and that's why you'll see reading. I think one of the things that this plan does is you have to look over time about how to best meet these needs in a way that's sustainable, but more importantly, we don't necessarily have the space to meet all those needs all at once, and that's why the facilities master plan is important. But there is an addition of, I believe, 9 teachers off the top of my head looking at the plan from here, and I'm having a hard time without my glasses. So I'd say we're tackling that. And at the middle school, look, we have the highest class size of, whether it's a 20 comparable districts that the school committee has looked at historically over time, or if you look at what our real comparable districts are as identified by our demographics by DESE, or the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we've got to tackle the middle school as well.
Yes, I had to pull all my 3 kids out of the school system from North Andover and sent to private school.
So the challenge is, in a 5-year plan, how do you look at it pre-K through 22? And I think that based on all the entry information, based on the school committee's directives, based on working with not just the principals but the leadership teams, figuring out what's a way that's sustainable and doable over that time period. This is a no frills. This takes in assumptions around Medicaid funding curriculum. It takes into assumptions around technology and the consolidated technology budget. It takes into consideration like the collaboration with Lynn as the town accountant and Melissa Murphy Rodriguez of finding creative ways to meet these needs. But simply put, say you wanted to do all these things at once in 1 year, you'd be looking at level services plus maybe 8%, but there's simply not the space to put everyone to meet all of the different needs. And it's that balancing act of what we believe over that time is doable. It's an increase for sure, and we're very keenly aware of the OPEB and all that, but this represents our best thinking today of how to meet those needs. And over time, we may come back and say, you know what, we need to change this in year 3 because this population's changed or this has changed.
I think one thing that we can all agree on, especially from a finance committee perspective, is we greatly appreciate that you put together a 5-year plan. So that's something that as a body we've been requesting and asking for a couple years at this point, and we are incredibly grateful because it allows us to understand how
what you need, right? So there was never a conversation around on a long-term perspective what the schools needed. I would ask, that's a pretty significant request over 5 years, and something that obviously we talk a lot about, and you've mentioned more than once about being kind of sustainable and responsible. So how do you guys plan to work with the town to put together this? You've established your needs, right? So now how do you fund them? Respectfully. So I think it'd be really helpful to understand, I'm sure you don't have an answer for that today, but your thought process and perhaps the school committee's process, if you've already discussed it, on how you're going to start having conversations about how to fund these needs over the next 5 to 10 years.
What I would say is that working with the town manager, we meet weekly since she's arrived. I anticipate us in 1 week we meet alone, and then the next week we meet with a couple of us, whether it's Dr. Mealy, myself, and Lynn, or Dee Casey, the assistant town manager.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly we're going to have to look at all the particular ways. I think what was critical for me is they hired me to be superintendent of schools to look at what are the needs of the schools. We certainly are going to have to look at every possible way to brainstorm with the town side of how to do this so that we don't rob Peter to pay Paul. And that's what we've done. I mean, over time we find an issue, we tackle it, and we have to cut from somewhere else, and then 5 years later someone says, well, what about this? And then we say, oh, remember when we, put in applied math and science in 7th grade, and now we have the best student growth percentiles, in the region on the MCAS, but we had to eliminate something else to get that. And part of me is saying, as superintendent, is, okay, so what are our needs in a way that we think is doable for the town? But to also say, these are our needs. And we have every intention to work and brainstorm with the town side in any way possible to figure out ways to do this. And I think that I'd say I feel really good about working with Melissa, with Lynn, the folks on the town side. I know Dr. Mealy, I can speak for you. Jim's been with us a long time. It's going to be a collaborative effort. And simply put, as a community, it raises a conversation that says, is the funding for our schools in line with our values, expectations, and who we are as a community? And I would say over the last decade, Jim showed you the 18.4 million, how the gap has doubled. Well, in North Andover, the challenges have risen, and so have the expectations, because we've done so many amazing things, and it's as a result of a remarkable community that donates, that does, that goes the extra mile, but we also still have these challenges. So part of the challenge for me as a new superintendent, conducting a whole year study of the district, is saying, what are those needs? How do we lay them out? And we're very fortunate to work collaboratively with the town manager to support this budget. But we do know going forward, it will be a challenge that we'll have to work collaboratively on to figure out.
And you can see just in the last 10 minutes a microcosm of what we're dealing with, where we were asked, why aren't you asking to get to the state average? And then that's questions followed by, we understand this is a bare bones, but how are you going to fund this, which doesn't even get you close to the state average? So you can see the difficulties that we're dealing with. As Gilly said, we work closely with the town manager. Lynn, I'll repeat what Gilly said. We're lucky to have her as the town finance director. And we've already started the conversation about, this. And this is responsible. It is meeting the needs of our students, but it is not asking for the world at all. So we're going to do our best. Who knows what we'll be able to do, but we're going to do our best to try to do what we've laid out.
Could I ask that you maintain a holistic view when you're doing these long-term plans? And for example, I'm very surprised that you have a 5-year plan here that totals over $250 million. It rises $2 million per year and involves hiring dozens of teachers. And we haven't done the analysis of what is the impact on OPEB.
Because we don't know. We don't know. We know how many positions we're adding.
Right.
We don't know yet how many positions we are going to be reducing. We don't know the net yet. We could do an analysis to say, this is what if we didn't reduce any positions, this would be the impact, but
Oh, so this is gross. This isn't net of any attrition?
we don't know what the net is. As we've been trying to say all night, we are keenly aware of the OPEB liability, and we're going to do everything we can to minimize the number of positions that it actually adds.
And we'll work with the town on any of the recommendations that become necessary to consider. I mean, this is not just a North Andover issue. This is an issue everywhere. And it's a challenge, you know, not just across schools, but all departments and all communities. And I think it's something that I, at least, you know, as someone who's in their second year as a new superintendent, I appreciate that the community has said, okay, we're gonna have a group that looks at this to tackle that, because long-term, it's you know, it's something that all 351 communities in the Commonwealth face.
No, and we appreciate that. And I think part of, I understand your comment about that full analysis, that at this point it would be very challenging to do it for the full year. In year one, though, in FY21, the budget for health benefits for new employees, I assume, does not include pre-funding the OPEB liability like the town side did last year with new employees. I would assume, or you guys don't know that yet because we're still working on the.
I'd say it's still working on it. If you look at any previous school budget, there was not a pre-funding of that. But like I said, we're keenly aware, and we will work to continue to look at how it all comes together as a group.
So
Yeah.
just as an example, last year, we were proposing to add 5.7, and it ended up at 4.0. We would hope to do even better than that with the 11.
Understood, but I think from a purely OPED perspective, it would be really helpful, I think, to review the recommendations that the committee made and consider them on the school side the same way that the town side has considered them, and kind of, I think, unofficially pledged to pre-fund that liability every time they hire a new employee, so that we're not creating a new liability. We can manage the existing liability, and then going forward, we can reduce that and think about, and I hear you and appreciate that you guys are thinking critically about that, but I think as a committee, that's important for us to make clear and for everyone to think about that going forward.
We
So,
definitely are,
appreciate
and
it.
we'll work with the town side on figuring out what's
The
best.
best policy. Thank you.
But personally, I mean, even I will echo Sasha's sentiments, how much we appreciate the 5-year plan. And when I say that, is like, even if we get these numbers, OPEB numbers, and work that in, regardless of that, I still want to know what the needs of the school are.
Absolutely.
I don't want to see you say, you know, oh, we can't have 5 teachers, or we don't need 5 teachers, we only need 3 because of OPEB. You know, I would far prefer you to tell us what the schools need. I do deeply believe that is your job, to tell us.
Absolutely.
What do the schools need?
I believe it's my job.
I
too.
know. I mean, that's, so when you say that, I was like, yeah, you know, that's what always wanted. What do we need? What do we need? Couldn't we get everything we need? Well, no, we haven't done that for decades. Got everything we need. But if nobody knows, there is no conversation. And
Yep.
we can't make comparisons. We can't say, what are we missing next year because we can't fund you, so what did we lose? Everyone has to know what we lost because we can't put the money forward. So, keep at that.
Yes.
I would just echo that. I mean, to me, I think it would almost be interesting to see what, like, you know, I appreciate what you guys are doing with the funding that you have. But as I said, I have 3 children at the Sargent. Like, the education they are receiving is amazing, and the teachers and the staff, everyone there in that building is phenomenal. But to me, because I'm a parent with kids in the schools, I see that there are more things that are needed. I see that I donate to my PTO so that they can buy new playground equipment. I see that I donate to my PTO, and my PTO is the ones that bought all of the Chromebooks in our building, or most of them. Like, to me, that shouldn't necessarily have to be a PTO funded thing. And I'd like to get a more realistic, like, this is the realistic view to me, but I've got to think that before you come and present to us, you have a much bigger list of, geez, it would be really nice if instead of adding 6 teachers, we could add 12. Or, you know, to me, I think it would be helpful as a person on the finance committee, helpful to the town for the bigger discussion to say, what is it that brings us closer to the median, like the state average, and what are we giving up by not being there? Yes, you're doing a phenomenal job with what you have, but there has to be some delta
I would just ask,
yes.
as you mentioned that, and as a fellow parent, I appreciate it. I think, and Jim, I may be putting words in your mouth, so please correct me or can talk about this, that what they're saying is that we don't necessarily, to be successful, have to be at that median number, so it's maybe not the best standard. Is that kind of correct? It's a really great discussion point. It's great to compare us to that, to understand where we land compared to other communities in the state, but it doesn't necessarily mean that getting there is going to give us the best
I have to jump
education.
in there because one of the reasons I believe that we don't have to get to the state median is exactly Ms. Lez's point, is that the PTOs and the volunteers
Contributes $18 million a year?
They contribute a significant.
Because that's the difference.
It is well, I don't know how much. That's just be very fundamental. How much money that parents, donate on their own, and I'm talking about organizations like
understand.
the Music Association that buys instruments and uniforms, and how many organizations do we have to support our sports in town?
Mm-hmm.
The students pay a fee to play sports, so the kids who can't do that, you have to fundraise for them and all their uniforms and all the equipment and field maintenance and all that. It's a huge amount of money that comes because we happen to be a fairly substantial community that has the means to do that. So there is a reason why we don't necessarily have to be as close to the median. It's because it is being made up, and it's being made up on the backs of the parents.
And I just want to say that I'm not suggesting that the median is necessarily the comparator. To me, what the comparison is, I suspect that there are conversations that you have before you get to what is presented to us and to the school committee, and that you are narrowing down your request to something that you think can work and be responsible and sustainable. And to me, I think it's worth it as a community to have that discussion about what gets left on the table before you come out. And whether that's bringing us to the median or not, I think it's worth a broader discussion about that.
I would just say, if you read the executive summary, I didn't want to stop putting groups in by name because I knew I'd forget somebody. But there's a whole paragraph about what we should be proud of. And I think that the school committee, I know there's a couple in attendance tonight, spoke pretty strongly about the support we get from our parents and our PTOs. Simply put, the NAAA with athletics, probably, we're talking tens and thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years that have done remarkable things. NAMA, the Music Association, and the instruments donated. The model classroom, keeping in mind there are different levels of what PTOs have, and the district, looking at how to balance that. Chromebooks, the donations, the merchants, you name it, Terry Holland, all the different groups that make this a remarkable community is something that I think the school committee, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think they certainly recognized it at one of our meetings. It's incredible that they put that forward, and I'm certainly cognizant of what it costs to play sports, what it costs to take a bus, what it takes and what has happened in the past in terms of all these different things, what it means for a private citizen to donate, tens of thousands of dollars so that we could, put our phonics program in place and foundations and accelerate it faster than the plan. We know that, and I think with this budget, coming forward, it was like, these are the assumptions. We know that we have a community that has done this, but we also know, what some of you guys have raised.
So let me just kind of ask Jen's question a different way. Is the 5-year plan, the proposed 5-year plan, what you believe we need as a community to at this point be successful? Or is there another version of this that we should be considering in a different way? I think that's...
I would say this. I think over time we've proven to be very successful in terms of academics and teaching and being efficient with what we have. We think that these increases are going to make us a better organization. And simply put, a lot of what we want to do is space dependent, and we have to have these conversations as a community about how we're going to fund this, how these operational needs drive the spaces that are created for capital needs, and more importantly, it's a great question, but I also think they have to keep in mind, we're 313th out of 323, in per pupil spending apples to apples across the Commonwealth. And when you're in the bottom 3 percentile, I think It's not, I mean, I think this is ambitious. I'm excited about it. I think it's what our kids need, deserve, and that's why I believe as superintendent, I should advocate for that. But at the same time, we want to be able to do so in a way that is doable over time based on, you know, we didn't get here overnight, and, you know, we're not going to get out of where we are overnight, and it's going to take a lot of work with the town. And I got to tell you that working with the town manager, Dr. Mealy, my team, their team, her team, you know, this is a great first step because this is starting to tackle some of our immediate needs that have been identified. Over time, how this is funded or the needs change, certainly. And that's going to be dependent on the facilities master plan. But more importantly, it's going to be dependent on, you know, is this something that's funding is doable? And then this hopefully has raised a conversation with the community to say, okay, you know, superintendent says we have some needs. You guys are identifying other needs. You know, it raises that conversation, and it's certainly one we're willing to have. But what we're advocating for is this increase to best meet the needs today and what we believe in the next few years. And that takes in the assumption of Medicaid still will cover curriculum. It takes in the assumption that the replacement plan for technology will continue, and it's really been a great partnership with the town and the consolidated plan with Chris McClure and Mike Grant. It takes into consideration that, you know, we've been fortunate to have a stabilization fund. You know, certainly all the other things, I 100% agree with you. And as a parent in the district, just a class list supply, you know, I have a daughter that's 16. I can remember being in third grade, and, you know, I went to buy it, and I was like, oh, that was a lot of money. That I was surprised, you know, it didn't, you know, back in my days in parochial school, I don't remember class lists like that. But I am very well aware of what people contribute, and I think the school committee is, I think our team is, and we're appreciative. And I think that's why there's a lot to be proud of in this community, because there's been some, you know, if you go back a long time, and I'm an employee for 22 years or 21 years here, and I've had just about every job at every level. There's been some really tough times in North Andover economically, and without our community going above and beyond for kids, we would have struggled to provide some of the great things that happen in town. So,
one thing where trying to understand where you stand strategically. So, are you, I mean, there could be a case that you have to make a compromise because you can't get all the funds you're asking to balance our budget. Right now, the town manager presented preliminary budget with a, unbalanced budget. And actually that included even a lower number than what you just presented to us. So right now we have a gap. So would you say, you know, I'll rather compromise, or I'm going to stand strong and ask the town meeting for an override?
Can I interrupt you? So that's no longer relevant. So the revenue and fixed cost committee, and Lynn, you can come up if you want to talk about it better, more eloquently rather than I will. But essentially, the revenue and fixed cost committee met, and the so Lynn, do you want to talk a little bit about your process with Melissa and the town assessor?
Yep.
And go through
So before I reconvene the revenue fixed cost committee to go over the shared costs, I also took another look at the revenue numbers as well. So what happens is because we have the revenue fixed cost committee meetings and vote on the revenues prior to the tax rate being set, we are basing the revenue for the real estate off of projections, okay? So it's based on the original projection of the 650 new growth and so on. We don't know what the new growth was certified at before we set the revenues. So once we got the new growth number, it was substantially higher than what we had projected at 650. So having said that, with the higher new growth number, that starts the tax levy at a higher amount. So I adjusted the new growth, which started the tax levy higher, which then increases the 2.5%. And then after a lengthy meeting with myself, the town manager, the assessor, planning director, and building inspector, we went over the whole list of projects that are in town and outlined exactly when we believed, strictly projections again, which one of these projects were going to hit the tax rolls in 2021, 22, and possibly 23. So I was able to get enough information from that meeting to determine that I could increase the projection of the new growth from 700 to 850. So that added another $150,000 to the revenues. So that process generated additional revenues to go towards the budget. And then we met for the shared costs, which is health insurance, liability, workers' comp. And we've been able to basically hold a lot of the liability, workers' comp, pretty steady. Workers' comp has agreed to give us no change for the next 2 years, no increase, which is good. We are in a good, we're in a good area. We've been doing really well with the workers' comp, with additional training with all the staff, school and municipal side, and how to really do things properly without hurting themselves. So that was the health insurance. We also discussed looking at what my projections are for 2020 and what we're going to end at, and built a lesser percentage increase. So we're going to level fund the health insurance, but out of that health insurance, we're going to only increase by 7%, which we got the information from GIC. It'd be 6 to 7%. We also have to calculate in potential new employees, which I haven't done that yet. And any additional amount over and above that, we're going to put into a finance committee reserve. So that allows us not to use our full savings that we've been carrying for the GIC. We've been using little here and there since we converted to the GIC, and put it into a reserve in case the end of the year we come up upon issues that we have shortfalls. The school might have additional sped issues that come up through the year that they didn't know about, that we can't fund otherwise, snow and ice, things like that. So we're not eliminating our ability to cover deficits if we have to. So overall, we don't have any large increases in the transfers to stabilization or anything like that. So we're able to trim some of the cost in the shared, and reduced it by $245,000 without taking into account the reserves. So with all these additional funding mechanisms and reviewing everything again, we were able to build up enough and to fill the capacity for what the school department needs at the 4.5, which is what the town manager has agreed to present forward in her recommendations. Yeah.
Well, that's news.
Yeah.
We had that discussion just 2 weeks ago, and
Well, you haven't met since
So-
then.
well,
Yeah.
Well, it's good that
Yes,
you
it
know, that's
is.
changed
I mean,
in the last
it
2 weeks. You know, which
I
is
mean,
first-
we've, really taken a hard look, and we're not, I'm very conservative on my budgeting. I'm a little beyond that comfort zone, but I still feel okay that we'll be able to meet the recommendations that we're putting forward. Yep.
And the Revenue and Fixed Costs Committee agreed with those
Yep.
kind of recommendations.
Yep.
And apologies, I probably should have led with that. I was gonna have a conversation about it in old business, but yeah, so this is no longer, a concern in terms of the town manager's letter versus.
Still, I would like to know where you stand strategically. Would you compromise or stand strong and ask the town
Thank
for
you.
more money? I mean, that would be on override. I mean, that would open up the discussion, for where we want to be as a community with our school system.
Well, I think we certainly, hopefully open to discussion this year to talk about, where we are, where we want to go, what our aspirations are. We've laid out that strategic plan. You don't see a lot of staffing plans, and particularly the suburbs, you don't see multi-year plans. You'll see it in major cities across the U.S. Planning, but, we believe that a lot of our needs are based on space, and there's a lot to consider and a lot of factors. We're also keenly keep an eye on our student population, about units coming online, in terms of, people moving to the community, and places being built. And Jim does a great job with the Rutgers model, and I call it the Mealy model. He's been pretty accurate over the years. So, as a school department, we're looking to best meet the needs of our kids in a way that we can do it over time.
And another reason we say we don't need to get to the state average is, it's interesting, when you look at by category, how much districts spend. So I looked at, just out of curiosity, I looked at how much is spent on healthcare, employee benefits, and we are well below. So I did the analysis and found out that of that $3,800 below per pupil spending, $400 of that can be attributed to efficiency in doing well in the costs for employee benefits. And there are probably others that that mean the same thing. And the fact that we're confident we need a half-time. We don't need a full-time assistant principal at our elementary schools. Half-time's enough. Most of those districts are probably doing a full-time. So there's a lot of reasons you don't need to get to the state average and still be doing a very good job. And then just one other thing, the question about kindergarten. That was actually one of those win-win-wins that are rare. But basically what happened with that was you and others were paying for that half-day tuition. It would be ideal if we could have our students for the full day and really have them ready to go for first day of first grade in our curriculum. So that was the win for the students. The win for the parents was they didn't have to pay tuition anymore. The win for the town was the fact that by fronting us the money, we lost $680,000 in kindergarten tuition for the first year. We weren't collecting it. The town had to front us that money, but Chapter 70 was going to increase $3,500 per student. So Chapter 70 actually went up more than the town was getting in tuition. So that was the third win. It was a no-brainer to do that. There was nothing else that was given up in order to make that happen. It was just a positive all around.
Yeah.
It was a great situation, an amazing solution. I remember when it was like, that was just amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I
It
think
was a
just,
leap of faith, however.
well, the other,
Totally paid off.
I mean, the other thing is, we'll continue. Someone said, well, how are you gonna work going forward to do this? Well, we'll continue to work with the town to figure out ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the Medicaid funding is, money that was coming in as well as the services we were providing, but like a lot of districts, we didn't have all the sign-off on the forms and approval from parents to bill for it, and we went door to door. I mean, simply put, we went from like 15, 18% signed, which is common in a lot of districts, to 96% signed because I know personally I probably went to 55 houses.
We went from $60,000 a year in Medicaid reimbursement to over $400,000.
But it wasn't just me, it was everyone on the team. And it was figuring out better systems in terms of when people register on a one-time sign-off and better ways to do it with technology. So we're committed to it. If you don't mind, we do have some other slides of questions.
Thank you.
And I would love to tackle. But yeah, there was a question, last year there was $120,000, because as a new superintendent, there was a new program last year to cover, and it was the therapeutic program for students with social emotional learning needs. To make a long story short, the district has two programs, one at the Thompson and one at the Kittredge, and the one at the Thompson was the one that was that $120,000 went to. Simply put, right now we have 8 students that are in the program at Thompson School, and an example may be, because I don't, like I said, we want to be efficient, but we want to serve our kids' needs and keep them in the community when we can, and it's also beneficial when it's, the cost of one student going out in a program of this nature, just one, is, easily $120,000 with transportation. It certainly has been beneficial for us, and certainly for the students who are in the program now. Year-to-year update of school enrollment, Dr. Maley?
So what we do for enrollment, and I think this is what you were asking, is we follow, so you can look for school year 93, 94, 333 students in kindergarten. The next year, if you follow the color, this was when we had half-day kindergarten, so you would see a big increase from who was in kindergarten to who was in first grade, because some of them were going to other places for full-day kindergarten. And as you can see, as you get down to 17, 18, there's a smaller number between kindergarten and first grade. But if you just follow the color down, that's the class moving along each year. So you could see that 333 kindergarten students became 312 seniors. And there's no consistency because there were some years where 327, 1999, 2000 was 326 at the end, but 326 became 377 at the end. So you don't see a pattern there. We try to see as many patterns as we can in order to do enrollment projections, but this is the data that we have, and this is what we base our projections on. And so you can see for yourself what happens. Pre-K is not indicative at all of how many students you're going to have in kindergarten, and you also see in here the situation that Dr. Gilligan talked about where you could actually have a class change from one year to the next for no apparent reason. Like, why would there be 19 more students from 368 to 387 from 3rd to 4th grade? No rhyme or reason. It's just every year there's a grade that just either drops or goes up significantly for no apparent reason. So you expect those during the 12-year period as well.
What you can see there is a pattern is the 8th to 9th grade drop.
So yes, we see, and the way the enrollment projections work is we take the 5-year average difference between one grade to the next. And yes, the transitions from 5th to 6th and from 8th to 9th are the most significant. Although one thing we did see over time was during the recession, we saw more students stay at, from 8th to 9th grade at the high school where they had been previously going to private school. But what we found, too, is as the economy got better, it didn't go back to where it had been. I think people found that the high school was pretty good, and so they stayed at in a greater number than they had previous to the recession.
That's because we brought music back to
That was it.
Marching band, and, people should know, prior to 2004, we had a high school that had no walls. There wasn't a wall in the building, so it was divided by 5-foot-high chalkboards for every classroom, wide open.
Open concept.
Yeah.
And the other thing it shows is if you go, let's just go to 2005, 2006, where we were at 4587, and it was the high point, I think, for the North Andover School District up to that point. And we've stayed pretty consistently, luckily, fortunately for us, we stayed at that number because we were using spaces that weren't meant for what they were being used for, and we were giving up an art room, a music room, a library in order to accommodate, and we were really busting at the seams. And it would have been difficult if we had been seeing growth in our enrollment. So it's been steady, and we're starting to be able to impact both the class size and making sure that we have those spaces that all schools should have. And that's what Dr. Gilligan was talking about when we moved the kindergarten out of the elementary schools. We backfilled with classrooms and with music, art, a library, among other spaces. And so what we are seeing, though, is births are on the increase, and we all see the developments that are going up. And we're waiting to see if the projections are consistent with what we actually see in school-age children. But we anticipate that the growth is going to be coming, and we need to have capacity in place before it gets here. So that's why we've been advocating for the Facilities Master Plan Phase 2 and the additional classrooms.
Yep. Update on the increases from last year. Go ahead, Dr. Mealy. We talked, one thing we didn't talk about is the high school had a second school nurse. There's over 1,400 students at North Andover High. It was paid for by a grant, and the grant was no longer available. So, to cover those needs, as you can imagine, with 1,400 students, we added the nurse, much needed, and tremendous job. The elementary teachers, we added 3 elementary teachers. One was a specialist, and we added 2 classroom teachers. One made a significant difference at the Atkinson and one at the Thompson. And as well, the other thing to keep in mind is over the years, we've had different bubbles at different schools. And as a team, we have to look at what those are. And just because someone's assigned to a particular school one year, we have to look at where they are in May, what those are, and how do we meet that. 0.5 reading. In 2012, we cut reading completely in North Andover. There was not one reading teacher or coach or any reading support. in elementary schools. And we know, as I said before, what the research says about kids reading by on grade level by 3rd grade and their success in life, college, career. And we've been able to add each and every year to get that up a bit. And in the plan, you know, we over the 5 years, we want to add more. High school teacher, we used it for math and science. One example was the AP class. You work your butt off to get into it, you should be able to take it. You know, not be offered maybe another AP or those things. And we were able to increase honors, an honors class as well, and a college prep. And don't forget, we want to find ways to, you know, bridge the gap so kids can make progress if they're in a college prep to have opportunities to take honors or a higher level. EL support, last year we increased some hours across the district which were needed in that old model. And we also increased the pay slightly. We had a plan to increase the pay from that $29 an hour to $32 and then $34, and that was that increase there. As some of you may know, in the first year, did anyone have a kid at the Brad Street the first year? So there were co-principals, you know, and we had one principal that was 0.8, one of the leaders, and the other person who was a co-principal has worked in the system a long time, and really, principal, I mean, she's remarkable, Mary Lou Connors, if you know Miss Mary Lou, and she was tremendous because she had the rapport with the parents, kids, everyone, but she's been the director of early childhood forever, and that's really what her job is. And it was a 1.8, whether you call it co-principals or you call it the work that she does now as the director of early child development, with early intervention, servicing the pre-K needs and all the special education needs in a school last year that was 500 kids who were 5 years old and younger. That make it a 2.0 was critical. The year-over-year head count for schools, that's you, Dr. Mealy?
So this was an update. You guys had provided the existing up till FY19, so we put in the change for FY20 and the projected right now before we have a chance to make any reductions for FY21, and then just updated the cumulative growth, which was a number that you had in. You had the annual percentage increase, and then at the end, the cumulative growth, and it stayed around right at 1.5% from FY10 to FY21. That's the cumulative growth in positions. What does schools plan to fund new FTE retirement and OPEB? We've said a few times, very sensitive to this.
We appreciate it.
And we'll just move on.
Thank you.
Okay, so one of the things that
I would like to table it for now, but I'd like to speak to it more with Melissa and Lynn at a later time. Okay.
And one of the other questions was the possibility of increasing the limit on the Special Education Stabilization Fund, but since it's now being funded fully, which includes the $130,000, we wouldn't anticipate the need to increase because next year's limit would be $250 that we could access if we had to. So we wouldn't be looking to increase the limit right now. And then I think this was the last one. If we weren't already planning to present to the school committee, could you please provide a breakdown of spending per elementary school and account for the differences specifically? It's an interesting question. Similar to what we were talking about with the state, you know, the per pupil spending, there are a lot of variables that go into it. Whether it's some schools have special programs and other schools don't. Or you could have a very experienced staff. So you have 15 teachers at your school, and you have 15 teachers, but this staff is fairly young or less years of experience, so they don't make as much, and that impacts the per pupil. So it's not really a good comparison. Another factor is right across the street here at Kittredge, they only have 235 students, but they have a principal, they have an administrative assistant, they have a nurse, so they have those same amount of employees as others, but because you're dividing by a smaller denominator, the per pupil seems like it's higher. But anyways, given that, there really isn't a lot of discretionary spending at our schools. I highlighted what we call school allocations, and that includes materials, supplies, if they're replacing any technology,
With the understanding that Medicaid has been funding all of our new curriculum initiatives at the elementary.
District-wide.
District-wide, so every school out of central office has been Foundations, Lucy Calkins, Eureka Math, ST Math, some of the fees associated with the grant that we received,
So it's separate of that. But then you can see all the other categories are pretty fixed. It's the salaries for custodians or nurses or other staff. Other staff is mostly teaching assistants. Professional is mostly teachers, also administrators, and then you can see secretarial and clerical, and then the utilities. So the per pupil spending varies, but you can see why it would vary. And then I highlighted again the per pupil allocations are higher at the school that a lot of people thought was getting the short end of the stick. They actually get more in school allocations than some of the other schools do. And then as far as just to highlight, go ahead.
Could you just define what is included in school allocations, please?
So yeah, it's if they do any type of award ceremony at the end of the year, their materials and supplies, the copiers, all of those
Anything
things
that's not
to help to keep the
related,
school
but it's an overhead cost of sorts.
to keep the school running.
Okay.
Yep. And then just to highlight again, what do we have at the schools, Dr. Gilligan?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's fixed positions. So as you look, I mean, the populations of schools are great, but all schools have a principal. You know, so you have one as low as 240 kids, and you know, last year, like I said, the Bradstreet was a little over 500, and you have bigger schools and smaller schools. They all have an administrative assistant that answers the phones every day. Everyone has a nurse. They all have a guidance counselor. They all have a half-time librarian, and every student in the district gets the same PE 2 times a week, music once a week, art once a week. That's the same across all schools, and that doesn't change. And I'd say the big difference where you may see differences at schools is the programming. So, you know, for example, you know, we have a big autism program at the Franklin School, the RISE program, and it's broken into a couple categories by grade level because of the laws. At the Sargent School, I think you guys are familiar with the multiple support program that we talked about earlier, as well as the life skills programs. At the Thompson and Kittredge, you have the therapeutic intervention programs, or what's now known as Thrive. And then at the Atkinson, you have a small program called the Partial Inclusion Program. So when you put in, you know, special ed inclusion teachers, and you separate the program teachers, you're gonna see some schools where the programming, where we've built capacity to keep kids in district with much more staff within that building for those programs.
And that's it.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Does anyone have any additional questions for our presenters? Thank you both very much, we really appreciate it. This was incredibly helpful, and we are excited to hear more going forward.
Okay.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity, and again, I'd like to thank the town manager and her staff, and Lynn, as well as the entire leadership team and everyone else that work here for the schools, because together, I'm really proud of the work that we've done and the collaboration we'll do, and I'm looking forward to a future collaboration, so, thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you both, appreciate it.
Thanks.
Do we have any public comment? No? Okay. All right, we are gonna vote on the proposed FY21 capital improvement plan. Tim has that ready to make a motion?
Before we do, Lynn, do you schedule past capital improvement projects that have been blessed by a town meeting and where we stand on them relative to spend?
Do I have one?
Not on you right now, but is that,
I can print a year-to-date budget report on this.
could you? Yeah, or actually, because some of these things go beyond 1 year, right?
They do.
So if you could give me basically an inception to date, appreciate it. And just go back a couple of years and go forward.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn.
I make a motion to approve the fiscal year 21 capital improvement plan budget of $6,516,069 as detailed in the capital improvement plan budget.
Second. Second. We have a second.
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? No? All right, all set. Let's approve our minutes.
Why? You can do it. Thank you, Lynn. Especially the last couple of weeks.
Thank you.
It's not a rush, it's just,
Whenever you have a,
you know, we,
do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of Finance Committee meeting minutes of dated January 7th, 2020.
Do I have a second? Second. Thanks. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Old business, I would just ask Jen to very briefly give us a recap on the Stevens estate.
We're continuing to meet about every 2 weeks. We had a meeting last night. We're going on an extensive tour of the facility on Friday, which has been noticed as a public meeting. If anybody would like to join, bring a flashlight and wear warm clothes are the instructions.
When's the
It's at 8 a.m. on Friday at the estate. The tour is scheduled to go for approximately 4 hours, so we're going to get really into all of the details. We're continuing to meet and talk through all the different operating options and different plans. We are sort of exploring different paths, such as talking to other facilities that are publicly owned and run to see how they are doing and if they're successful or not successful, lessons we can learn. We're also on another track talking to different entities like the trustees of the reservation, the Mass Audubon Society, and a couple of others to see if there's any potential for a partnership there as an option that we could present to the town. And we're continuing to have representatives from the estate at every meeting who are filling us in on how, their view of the current operating situation. So we're taking in a lot of information. A public survey is going out soon, so keep your eyes open for that and encourage people to fill it out because we would love to get people to comment and tell us what they think.
Awesome. Thank you for your service on that committee. We really appreciate it. We're super excited about it. And I think that was it. Anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss before we adjourn the meeting?
One thing what really bothers me that within like 2 weeks, suddenly a gap of almost $1 million disappeared. And, I don't know, it's like just, I'm surprised, really. I'm really surprised.
I'm not. Like Lynn said, that
We've never had that. For the last 6 years I'm here, we had a budget meeting. 2 weeks later, we didn't come up with $1 million more money. I've never seen that. It's the first time.
So the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee had never gone back and re-reviewed revenues after the tax rate was set.
I cannot recall that this ever was done.
But I think that's the difference. I think that after the tax revenues were set, they had a conversation at length with the assessor's office. And then, like Lynn said, in addition to the assessor's office, they had conversations with the planning department and the building department to establish specifically, what new growth we would see in FY21. So their forecast got better. So the more information they had, they were able to make a more accurate projection.
Well, maybe we should have asked Lynn to stay here, and maybe we'll bring this up in that last year. I think this happened every year, but we just bagged it after the budget was done, and it was always kind of a reserve. Yes, we knew the numbers probably end up a little bit better than what we have in the budget, but we still budget or balanced our budget with a little bit of a lower number. I just don't know if we just try to avoid a confrontation, a little bit harder discussion about how the money can now, allocated, because the school came with a fairly high budget in, and initially it didn't really help to budget the balancer budget. Then they came even with a higher number, and suddenly this is all mute.
Respectfully, I've been part of this conversation for the last 2 weeks,
Yeah,
and I
but
think other people have been as well, and I feel comfortable that the information that we were given was re-reviewed extensively afterwards, and
Make a suggestion? It wasn't just a revenue increase, it was also a different pencil sharpening attitude relative to certain large costs such as healthcare. And I think I'd like to see, because you've talked to me about, briefly about how we closed the gap, and Lynn just did as well. Can I see some detail about how we went from what was initially approved as a revenue number to something more available? And if we could have that detail, that would satisfy us.
all of that should be publicly posted, but I can send that out in an email so that everyone has it. I will get that final to you. And I also think as part of the conversation, in addition to reviewing this after the tax rates were set, I think Tim's point that there is new eyes on information. I think that's really helpful to everyone and changes perspectives. And so I think that was part of the conversation as well. So I'm happy to further disseminate that information, and we can have a more in-depth discussion if you'd like at our next meeting.
An example, and I'm only giving a real generalization, but as I understand it, the healthcare, the budgets were always inflated. And so with new town management, they said, look, that's a little bit over the top. We still need some cushion, but it's a little bit over the top. So that, I don't know the amount that was taken on that, Thomas, and I think we need to do it.
Yeah, maybe with a new management it changes. I'm just noting this. In the 6 years, this is my 6th year. That never happened, and it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And I'm just voicing this here. Never seen it before, and I'm just wondering, did we just avoid a huge discussion by suddenly finding that money?
Okay. Anyone else want to discuss anything further? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Or do I have a second? I'll second. All those in favor? All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.